Hey everyone, welcome to another SAO Wikia podcast, and today we will be covering the most recent SAO novel in the series, Volume 26 Unital Ring V. As usual, I have Gsimenas from the SAO Wikia right here with me, the busy doctor nowadays. Hi there Gsimenas, how are you doing?
Yeah, in the middle of two deadly shifts, so let's do this.
That did not sound like shifts, but I'd say what it sounded like was appropriate for what you meant. But today we will have a brief reminder for Volume 25, of course, which was a year ago almost. Then we're gonna go into Volume 26, and then, unlike the usual ones, we're gonna have a small Q&A section at the very end, answering your questions that you sent us through the SAO Wikia Twitter. Now, the reason we're doing this, of course, is it's mainly because we have a little bit less illustrations in this book due to an injury Abeshi was going through during the production of this book. So I feel like that should cover our time slot quite decently. You know, I don't want to go over 1 hour anyways, that's a little too long. But yeah, I have been rambling too much. Obviously, a spoiler warning. If you don't want Unital Ring V spoilers, do not watch this podcast about Unital Ring V. But with that, let's move on to our previously on Unital Ring, having a look at Volume 25. I dropped something, that doesn't matter. Let's go. So we had two different scenes in the previous book. Walk us through them, Gsimenas.
Basically, Volume 25 ended the Unital Ring portion with the gang surviving the Sina's onslaught and getting almost entirety of her army on their side because her choker spell was made poof. Sina ran off with her actual lackeys, and she's not present in Volume 26.
Oh, so we don't get to learn anything about her identity in this book, do we?
Nothing at all.
That's a bit of a bummer for those looking for more identity information on all fronts, if I'm being honest. But go ahead, let me not cut you off.
Well, that's about it. That's all that you have to know from that side, since some of the characters that switched camps will be present in this volume. But Sina herself is only mentioned in passing.
Nice. And another portion of the previous volume was, of course, taking us back into Underworld. What did we have there? In
the Underworld portion of Volume 25, the gang went back for a longer dive during the weekend and met up with Eolyne and Selka and Eolyne to go to the Central Cathedral to meet Alice's sister Selka on the 88th floor of the cathedral. That's where they found her deep frozen with two characters that totally look like Tiese and Ronye and who also seem to be in deep freeze.
We were hoping it was not actually them, but I won't bring my personal opinions. This is a Wikia podcast, we're just summarizing. That's where we left off the previous book, exactly at this instance, with a massive cliffhanger. And now, let's start with Volume 26, Unital Ring V. I'm still not used to the numbers not matching. I feel like that was a huge mistake. But yeah, let's continue exactly where we left off. Go ahead.
Do you want me to start with an overview of the volume or with the scene?
That's a good idea. Let's go back and get an overview, yes.
So, Volume 26 is basically split into Unital Ring portions and Underworld portions, and both of those portions are also split into two perspectives. The Unital Ring portion is told from Sinon's perspective and from Silica's perspective, while the Underworld portion has Kirito's perspective and Asuna's perspective.
A question on that, is there a significance with Lisbeth considering she's on the cover as well? I just realized in asking.
There was a question about that in the Q&A section, so I could answer there.
Oh yeah, let's leave it for that. Let's keep people hanging, yeah. Is that it for our overview?
So, I am pretty sure a lot of people will be asking this. There's only one Unital Ring illustration, and people get the idea that this volume is only going to be in Underworld, but I'm gonna say that the split is mostly 60-40. A bit more in Underworld, but Unital Ring action is pretty decent and long. The whole volume is split into 23 chapters, and each chapter switches between the Unital Ring section and the Underworld section.
So unlike the illustrations, the narrative is more or less almost evenly split, you're saying?
I think it's a bit more on the Underworld side, only because the first three chapters are in Underworld, but everything afterwards is basically one chapter in the Underworld, one chapter in Unital Ring, and so forth. And the Unital Ring sections keeps changing perspective from Sinon to Silica and back again, depending on who's more relevant. at the time.
Alright. It is really nice to have Silica so prominently in the cover, I like it. But yeah, I guess that means we can move on with the actual story, can we?
Yes.
Let's go then.
The volume begins right where volume 25 off, with the gang seeing Selka sitting next to a fragrant olive tree and seeing two girls on either side seemingly protecting her. All three of them are in a state of deep freeze, so they look somewhat like statues because they're lacking color and life, the sense of being alive at the moment. But the gang doesn't take note of the two girls on the side, since Alice cares more about Selka and rushes over to her first.
But they are still frozen.
Yes, all three of them have been frozen for quite a few years. So all of them go up this hill. Alice goes for Selka, and then Kirito notices this is the two other girls, and this gets the idea to place Tika and Laura next to the statues, whereupon he realizes that those faces, I know where those faces look familiar from.
Is that what took him to actually realize?
Yes, that's what it took him to realize.
What a great senpai.
That basically the two statues look like 10-year-older versions of the two younger girls.
Oh, perfect. Kirito being Kirito.
So the three people are frozen and they don't really know how to unfreeze them. And while they're basically talking things over, they hear the doors on the other side of the room opening up, and a girl with a pet on her shoulder comes over to the hill. The girl is revealed to be Airy, or the elevating operator, who used to operate the elevator disc between floors 50 and 80. She recognizes Kirito, Asuna, and Alice, and she's been watching over this part of the cathedral that no one else can access for several decades now. She's basically coming down every so often to just check on the statues and clean them up a bit so that plants around them don't grow on the people.
So I imagine her age is also frozen?
Well, she's been around for over 200 years, and she has been living for 200 years before then.
But unlike the other Integrity Net, she's not put into deep freeze. How does her memory work exactly? Do we get any information about that?
Really, we basically know that the first 200 years she spent, she didn't really have much of any memories because she's spending most of the day just operating the elevator. But for the other 200 years, not really explained how she's keeping her sanity.
I mean, the only real explanation would be memory alteration. Or maybe she just sleeps a lot like Queen Ella did or something. Who knows?
Not explicitly mentioned, so you've got to make guesses at this point, since that's all we've got.
Or we can ask Reki at some point and maybe he'll answer. Is that it for this one? Or do we have more Airy exposition going on around as to what's been happening?
Well, Airy explains what's been going on in Underworlds. Did you get that timeline I posted?
I do, but I don't have a picture for it.
Alright, then I'll just look through it.
I can add it when editing this video. That would be convenient.
Yeah, so basically she explains that after the whole acceleration started, Selka started researching the deep freeze technique with another person, and she contributed heavily to it. Once it was developed, she was the first to volunteer to deep freeze herself, and Kirito and Asuna didn't really have any reason to forbid her from doing so, since Selka wanted to reunite with Alice at some point. This was followed by the other knights gradually. Well, they were given a choice basically to either join Selka and defreeze themselves, or live out their lives either as part of a new order, since the Integrity Knight order was abolished, while the Integrity Pilot order was established, or they could live their lives as they pleased, just being freed from their duties. Some did actually choose one of the two options, but the majority of them chose to freeze themselves for unknown reasons. We don't really know why, well, not given any explicit reasoning for why they chose to freeze themselves, but we're free to assume that Kirito, the Star King, had predicted that something would happen when he was logged out and wanted to prepare for it, but that's just my interpretation.
So basically just an emergency army, so to say. Your assumption.
Yes, that just having an elite squad ready for deployment if Underworld needs saving again.
I'm curious what's gonna happen with Underworld, to be honest. In the next 5 volumes at this pace. But yeah, that means
you think that there's only gonna be 5? I'd say 10 at least.
Damn you, Reki. But yeah, can we move on to the next one then?
Yeah, so the gang also learned from Airy that there is an art for undoing the deep freeze, but it's located all the way out on Admina.
How inconvenient or convenient for the narrative for this to take an entire book.
Well, the Star King had some plots going on, I guess, because we later find out that he had planned an entire series of trials for the young Kirito to go through just to get that art back.
You mean the Star King?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
You mean the Star King or you mean Reki?
No, the Star King actually hid that a box with the entirety knowledge of on the deep freeze art and hid it in a way that Kirito would have to go through a series of trials just to find it.
Okay then. And what about the illustration? What's happening here?
Well, since they were planning to go to Admina using the Star King's old mecha drag that's located on the 95th floor, they're climbing up the stairs up to the 90th floor, which has a bath. The grand bath that's been split into male and female baths now. And the girls are trying to pretend that Kirito's the one who's interested in the bath, not them.
Of course he is. He has a lot of experience with baths now, considering progressive.
So they're basically just trying to make it sound like Kirito's the one who wants the bath, when they're actually planning to go for a dip themselves once he leaves, since the dragon can only carry 2 people. And Kirito decided to go with Eolyne.
And you mentioned Admina Cardina. Do we get more information about how they actually function in regards to, being planets and stuff? Or was that something you're gonna mention in some of the later illustrations? I don't know.
I can mention here, basically we find out that Admina was called Lunaria some decades ago, as in what used to be called the moon is now called Admina, because it turns out that Admina doesn't revolve around Cardina. So basically they're just 2 planets that are just flying in parallel orbits.
Oh, that's one of the good parts at being built with a game engine, physics be damned. So they are basically very nearby, going about the same speed, around the same orbit, approximately.
Yeah, and since they don't revolve around each other, since they rotate around each other's axis, there's just the distance between the planets and the planets' capitals can be different depending on the time of day, solely because
of their own rotation.
Point of the day, they're basically facing each other, and on other times of the day, they're facing opposite ends.
And that means we can move over to the bath scene, shall we?
So the bath scene takes place after Kirito and Eolyne depart the planet, and now we can move on.
Okay, I was gonna say that doesn't exactly answer my question, but thank you.
So while Kirito and Eolyne are flying in deep space, the girls decide to take a bath, and the rat you see in this illustration is a pet from Moon Cradle that Ronye basically got for herself, and this pet has been around since then. And Stika and Laura go for a race in the bath, while the rat decides to beat them at their own game.
The rat's only reason to exist right now is to prevent us from demonetization. We're not talking about the bath, we're talking about the rat.
Yes, definitely.
Anything interesting other than this thing, so we can move on from the demonetizing picture?
Nothing really happens of plot relevance in this. Just some Asuna monologues, but nothing that contributes to the plot directly right now.
But nothing so far happened on the Unital Ring side of things?
No, the Unital Ring side starts a bit later.
Okay, so we continue with Underworld and switch over to Kirito and not Yu-Gi-Oh!
Totally not Yu-Gi-Oh! So in this illustration, Kirito and Eolyne have already reached Admina, and while they're trying to reach the capital of this planet called Ori, their sensors suddenly pick up that something's aiming at them.
They are currently in Zirfan, right? Star King's personal jet.
Yes, they're currently flying the dragon, trying to find a place to land so they could... Basically, the planet's surface is covered in a giant flower field for some reason. We don't know why. And they're just trying to close in on town enough and then land somewhere outside of town so that they can't land in the town itself since their operation was supposed to be secret.
Oh,
so
right. The incarnation that can detect other incarnation and the incarnation that can hide the incarnation.
Well, basically, their mission was secret because Eolyne didn't get any proper clearance to leave the planet and come to Admina, just so that he wouldn't alert whoever is the mastermind behind the whole issues on Admina. So while they were trying to find a place to land, their sensors pick up that something is aiming at them, and they try to avoid several missiles, but some of these missiles turn out to be organic worms.
Is that the thing we see on the cover?
Yes, it's either these worms or a different creature that I'll talk about later.
Okay.
These worms are dangerous because they apparently seem to eat through Kirito's incarnation. So even though he set up a barrier, these things just basically eat their way through it. Kirito manages to hold off one of them long enough for Eolyne to freeze it, but he doesn't notice that there's another one on the other side of the dragon, and it goes through and makes the dragon crash land.
How does Eolyne freeze them?
Oh, he creates 10 cryogenic elements and uses them to freeze the worms, so nothing too special.
So he's skilled with cryogenic elements or something? I'm trying to make a link to Yu-Gi-Oh! You don't need to try to, be very technical here. It was a simple reference, Gsimenas. It was a simple reference. Don't take it too seriously.
Yes, so assuming if you ask a question, you want an answer.
There's a very, very, very important line between actual shitposts and actual serious questions. I live on that line, not going either way. You gotta know the balance.
The relevance of this illustration ends with basically the two of them being shot down to the ground due to that one worm escaping.
So that means we are moving on to the next one then.
But after they crash land, they go check out the worm, and Kirito notices that that worm is apparently parasited by something else. So Kirito decides to disarm the worm by removing some umbral elements that were stuck in its stomach and removing the parasite and then healing that what seemed to be a worm, but after this healing, it turned out to be more like a snake. Kirito's plan was that if they returned it to its original state, it wouldn't try to kill them anymore, but would instead try to go back to where it came from since it was organic. And it looked more like this little worm or serpent looked like a baby in a sense that it was looking for warmth, but not in the physical sense, but in the sense of finding its mother. So the whole plan was to release it out in the wild and then chase after it to whoever is the mastermind behind shooting them down and in turn behind the troubles on the planet.
Such animal cruelty on Admina. Someone needs to take care of that.
And I think that's enough for this illustration, so we can move on.
You never respond to my jokes.
And this is the only illustration for the Unital Ring side, so I'll just summarize what this side was all about. Basically, the gang logged into Underworld and decided to go scouting for more iron ore and just to get a better layout of the land when they come across basically a boss chamber. It's basically a dome with a giant tree that has a giant hornet's nest, and that giant hornet's nest has tons of giant horns swirling around. There's no way to go around the dome, and that's where they come across one of the characters from the previous volume who jumped camps from Mudasina's army, and you know him from the Legru Corridor episode of the Fairy Dance arc.
Oh, it's that guy again.
Yes, his name is Frisco.
Nice.
He's basically like a male version of Argo in that he's a scout and an information dealer, and he comes scouting this area and knows more about Unital Ring's structure from other players.
Nice, more characters to replace Argo. Perfect, that's exactly what the fanbase needed.
So while we knew from Argo's intel that basically that the center of the world was the goal point, while the outer circumference basically was dotted with the players from every other game on the seed. But what Argo didn't tell them, because either she didn't know or she didn't catch wind of it yet, was that this whole world of Unital Ring isn't flat. It's basically divided into sections that are at different elevations. Basically a terrace structure. Let's kind of imagine like a rice field in the mountain. Now, between these different sections, there's only one route to go through from each of the different games' starting points. And each of these points either has a boss or some deadly puzzles or some different passages that allow one to go from one place to the other. And they also learned that there's actually 2 games that have managed to already clear the first obstacle towards the center of the world, that is the goal point. These 2 games are Apocalypse Date and Asuka Empire. The first one is never mentioned before in the series, while the second one came up in the Sister's Prayer side story, the Mother's Rosario prologue.
Where Yuki, her sister, and was it Merida played together at some point?
Yeah, that's the one.
Mm-hmm.
So they learned that the 2 games managed to clear the first hurdle while they were busy with internal struggles.
When you say 2 games managed to clear it, do you mean to the players that came from those worlds as a group of people? Okay, got it. That was confusing me since the beginning.
So the whole reason that those 2 groups managed to clear their first hurdle was basically that they didn't have to deal with random shit. And by shit, I mean the GGO side, for example, was currently in a shootout because they were low on ammo and they're trying to fight for resources. Meanwhile,
that
the
is
Alo
a big
side,
brain move right there.
Meanwhile, the Alo side was busy with Asina's plots, so most of the other games were busy with some kind of shit like that, while Asuka Empire and Apocalyptic Date were basically, we need to go to the goal point, let's work together.
Do we have any info on what Apocalyptic Date is? Is it a dating simulator or something based on that name?
It's actually a game where all the players are half animal humans.
Oh, okay.
And Silica was actually interested in trying that game at some point because the animal furries looked cute to her, even though most of them are pretty militaristic.
Now that you mention it, it brings the tiger guy from Ordinal Scale to my mind.
Maybe he's playing the game right now. Maybe he'll come into play at some point. But basically, these players, since they're basically half animals and have weapons on their bodies, they didn't really have to stop for crafting hurdles to get themselves some decent gear and could just continue going to the goal point, while Asuka Empire made a crafting station right on the first town, contributed to getting themselves teched up, and with their resources managed to defeat the boss. So the gang, since there were 2 players ahead of them, the gang decides to go after this Hornet boss to be on even footing. Since their village is quite close to this point, they expected to be able to catch up to the 2 other games, since they would have a forward base right next to the first obstacle.
There's a lot of stuff going on, and if I'm not mistaken, we still didn't get to the Silica part regarding the illustration.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And as I said, half of the book is about Unital Ring, and we only get 1 illustration for it.
Oh, beautiful. How far away are we from Silica?
There's still pretty much a lot of stuff still going on in between, but I'll keep it short. So they started the battle, but they found out from the Ratman that those hornets could be affected with a poisonous flower that could be found around the forest. Since the hornet monsters were the thing that wiped out their ancient civilization and forced them to flee to a new place of residence. And from their ancestors, they learned that they could make a poison that would basically paralyze these hornets and allow them to take them down more easily. We'll get to the cheap illustration later, but it's basically the scene where they're crafting that poison from the flowers, and the poison smells pretty good when it's being boiled.
Oh, the chibi illustration you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're a bit too far away from that right now.
Yeah, but the flower is so poisonous that just touching it is enough to get paralyzed and get damage over time. And one player shows how this works due to the stupidity of touching the flowers without any protection.
If Kirito was there, it was gonna be him, so good for the guy. He's aiming for that
someone else
role.
had to fill in the idiot role. So, after building up stocks of this poison, they enter the dome, and there's the flower. The hornet's nest is surrounded by a field of flowers that the hornets feed from. These flowers are created basically by killing any other living creature, bringing their bodies to their nest, and then implanting flower seeds into them to grow, to use as nutrients for their growth. That's why the hornets are aggressive and at some point took down the Ratman civilization. And this is where this illustration kicks in, because before starting the battle, they decide to send several of their scouts into the flowers to poison them, to get rid of as many of the hornets as possible and reduce basically reduce the need to fight all of them by paralyzing at least some of the hornets.
So who's currently on scene? We know Silica's there based on the illustration, but who else is there?
There's the scouts split into different sectors and approach the flowers from different places. The scout team features Silica, Argo, but one of the players from insect side, and one of the ratmen, the chief's daughter, Chet.
And in general, who's playing at the moment?
There's like 22 players, basically the entire gang minus Kirito, Asuna, and Alice, plus some people from insect side, plus some basin warriors, plus some people from the former Mitosena's army.
Okay, so like Leaf, Elizabeth, Sinon, etc. are playing along as well.
Yes, there's a lot of people, like 22 people I think, who are in this battle. But the first part of the battle was the scouts trying to poison the flowers and reduce their opponent's military force.
I hear the doji in the back. I wish we could bring him with a camera. That would get us views. You can continue.
Yeah, so along the way, Silica notices one of these bugs, which were basically hornet attractors. Basically as traps for players who were trying to go in for the flowers and poison them. But Silica noticed it and got rid of it before she got spotted, so she managed to go through this safely. On the other hand, Chet, that Ratman chief's daughter, got picked up by the wasps and taken to their nest.
Ooh. Is that a cliffhanger, or do we have more Unital Ring stuff?
Well, this is supposed to be a cliffhanger for what's going on next, but I'll keep it short that this plan works and they managed to get half of the Hornets' army paralyzed and then go in for their full frontal attack. But they also have a second idea that they're implementing, and it's basically, before the battle they scavenged a lot of resources, and now they build bunkers in the form of log cabins that they use to hold out some of the hornets and use as save points during the battle to heal up their wounded. So the bunkers serve as double purpose as hornet lures to reduce the amount of stress the frontliners have to deal, and as save points for healing. And the battle ends with basically the Hornet Queen stepping out and Silica bringing out her bear to help fight them.
Alright, they have a bear. Is that the platypus bear or another bear?
No, that's the thorn shooting bear.
Oh, okay.
That shoots thorns out of its stomach.
Okay. I am familiar with the platypus guy because, that was in the English translated volume so far. But yeah, I guess we'll meet the others soon enough.
Well, the bear was in the first volume too. It's just that its taming was in volume 23.
Oh, is that a spoiler for me? Is that the bear that Kirito destroyed by just materializing all the logs?
Yes, it's that bear, and it just respawns after some time.
Perfect.
Until it gets tamed, and then when it's tamed, it no longer respawns.
Perfect. So we move on back to Underworld?
Yes, that pretty much covers the Unital Ring side, as in this whole battle is told from both Silica's and Sinon's perspective, and it just keeps switching since Sinon is acting as the leader of the whole raid, while Silica is part of the scout party and later comes in with the bear reinforcements to fight the queen.
And that has been our lesson to not trust the amount of illustrations from a single game. So moving on back to Underworld then. Ooh,
yes.
We just stepped into the middle of a fight. Is that correct, or did I skip an illustration? No,
yes.
I did not.
There's no illustration in between, so this is a new character introduced in this volume. When Kirito and Eolyne arrive at the base, they infiltrate it by using Eolyne's incarnation to hide their presence, basically erasing their presence to an extent that allows them to move in without anyone noticing that they are there. This incarnation eats up Eolyne's stamina a lot, but it serves their purpose, and they manage to sneak into the basement where they find basically a giant serpent that's sedated through drugs, and that's little serpent that they followed into the base is trying to cuddle to this giant serpent because it's his mommy.
Oh, so that may be the giant serpent we had in the cover.
Yes, as I said that.
Oh, you can even see the small serpent there on the head.
So that's the mommy serpent, and that's the little serpent that was basically whoever is behind the base basically forces the big snake to reproduce in its comatose state. Then they take her newborn babies and parasite them with some kind of snail parasite or something that takes over their minds and forces them to crave thermal energy.
That is so wholesome. Not the entire thing you just explained. The fact that the little one is also here cuddling with the mommy. The event is portable.
Meanwhile, their stomachs are filled with explosive umbral elements that basically are like small miniature black holes when they explode. So they create bombs out of serpents' babies.
That sounds dangerous.
And at that point, the two boys notice that some researchers, lab workers, are coming into the room, and they hear them speaking that they're going to kill off the baby that they freed from the parasite since it's too old to be reimplanted with the parasite. And the two boys can't bear to watch, so they both activate their incarnation to stop them by breaking the syringe that they use for lethal injections. This causes the base's alarm to go off and summons this character here who comes in to investigate. Eolyne tries to hide them again with his incarnation, but Istar senses that something is wrong and swipes his blade at them. Kirito manages to dodge, and since Istar can't actually see them, he's just sensing that something is wrong there. He decides to go investigate the serpents, and then Eolyne removes his incarnation, but he falls unconscious because of the stress from using this incarnation, and Kirito decides to escape the base with the serpent by faking that the serpent has come back from its coma and started rampaging. So that's just to hide his own incarnation as he blows up the hatch that leads outside to the roof and takes the snake with him. This leads us to the next illustration.
Ooh, what a beautiful illustration we have over here.
And this is the illustration of the three of them in the sky. Kirito took the snake with him to the sky to escape pursuit, but Istar followed them by flying, and he shot Kirito while he was unguarded, but Kirito just healed that wound since it wasn't deadly yet.
When you say they are in the sky, what do you mean they're in the sky?
I literally mean that they're above the clouds. They're just incarnation floating.
Oh, okay then. I like to think it's incarnation as well. I'm just gonna make our names a little smaller because I realize they are blocking this wider illustration. It should be better now. How did they get up there? Just with the incarnation? Is that it?
Yes, incarnation.
Perfect.
And Kirito, there's also a giant serpent next to them because it's also Kirito making it float with incarnation as well.
Okay. I have no questions. Fine.
So this illustration comes up when Eolyne wakes up from his exhaustion and starts talking to Istar because the two of them know each other. They're basically old acquaintances and childhood friends, and Istar was the opponent Eolyne faced in the Unification Tournament's finals, and Eolyne managed to beat this guy. So they're basically old acquaintances and childhood friends / rivals.
I see. And the Unification Tournament is still being used to become a pilot, or is it just a prestige thing? I feel like I asked this question in a previous podcast.
I'm pretty sure we talked about it, and that it's used in the selection of integrity pilots, and just a way to earn a lot of credits to your resume.
Okay, so it's a resume booster.
Yes, pretty much. And it's a tournament that Eolyne won to become an integrity pilot and integrity pilot commander.
I see. Anything else we're gonna talk about in this illustration? It is quite the important one. Do we know who Istar actually is?
At this point, our knowledge on Istar is limited. Kirito's description of this character is also pretty vague, because you can't tell whether this is a guy or a girl. This character is very androgynous in that it's impossible to tell either way, and this mystery is never answered throughout the entire volume on whether Istar is a guy or a girl.
Is that something explicitly stated, or is that a vagueness that comes from the fact that Japan doesn't really have gendered pronouns?
Kirito repeatedly states in his narrations that he can't tell whether this is a boy or a girl.
Okay, so that means we can know that it is an important detail.
Yes, I assume that it's either going to be used as one of the draws to find out what's going to happen next, or there's something that's plot relevant, whether this is a guy or a girl.
And I'm seeing a pistol, a gun in his hands. Is that something you want to talk about now, or is that something we're gonna get to in the next one or something?
Well, Istar is armed with both a saber and a gun. As I said before, Kirito got shot with it because Istar wanted to test it out.
Oh, so he's just testing it out. It's not something like a mainstream weapon at this point.
At this point of the battle, it seems like it's not the main weapon at this point.
Okay, got it.
So Eolyne accuses Istar of being behind activities that go against the Underworld's laws, and he orders Istar to turn himself in, but Istar had been stalling for time, since while he's busy keeping these two boys occupied, the base personnel below have started their evacuation. And while they're evacuating, the base is also set on self-destruct to remove all evidence. So at this point, Eolyne and Istar start duking it out, while Kirito has to resolve 3 different issues. One issue is that there are 2 mecha drags coming after them to assist Istar. Basically, Istar's lackeys coming in to help him or her out. Meanwhile, a second issue is that there's a giant mecha drag that what is used to shoot them down is now getting ready to evacuate their personnel and all their equipment. It's basically a big dragon that has a cargo hold that's big enough to carry a lot of stuff. So that dragon is about to flee the scene with their more valuable stuff. And the third issue is that the base is about to self-destruct, and some people haven't yet evacuated. So since Kirito can't split himself into 3 to solve all 3 issues, he comes up with an idea. He remembers Cardinal's doors, so he uses Incarnation to basically open up a door to Asuna and Alice, who are currently in the kitchen of the central cathedral.
Oh, good thing they moved to the kitchen by the time the door arrived.
Yeah, so the 2 girls were making lunch or dinner for the 2 boys once they got back. But Kirito called them through the door for assistance, and that leads us to the next illustration. So Kirito asks the two girls to help him out with the 3 tasks that he had to handle, Asuna was put in charge of moving the base so that since the explosion was about to happen in the basement, and thus saving the people who were still stuck in the upper parts of the base.
When you say moving the base, you are referring to the Stacia ability that she still has access to, right?
Yes.
Got it.
She basically just raises her kitchen knife and lifts the entire building. I'm not joking. She's literally armed with a kitchen knife right now.
But that is a good reminder for everyone, and that the Stacia ability, it's not the ability of the weapon, but the account itself. So whatever weapon she has, she still has access to the Stacia ability, with or without radiant light.
So while Asuna's moving the base and its personnel away from the upcoming explosion, Alice uses her sword to go after that big mecha dragon that's trying to escape and basically forces it to crash land when it was trying to take off. And Kirito's using his blue rose sword to freeze the 2 dragons coming for them, basically encasing them in a prison of ice that forces the dragons to crash. But since the ice has high priority, it cushions the fall so that those 2 people piloting the mecha drags don't die in the collision.
A lot of people were surprised when they saw Blue Rose Sword with Kirito for whatever reason. I never understood that confusion when the illustrations were first released. Like, Kirito always had the Blue Rose Sword since Volume 18, Prologue 3, right?
Yes.
We had no reason to believe he wouldn't have it.
He even had to use it to open up the doors to the cathedral upper floors. Right. So he had to have him with it. And he just picked it up before leaving the cathedral. So in this scene, there's these 3 concurrent actions. Meanwhile, Istar is fighting Eolyne, and the battle ends basically with both Eolyne and Istar's swords shattering. Ooh. Then Istar takes out his pistol and says enhanced armament, proving that the sword wasn't actually Istar's main weapon, but the pistol was the main weapon. And it has a special ability that creates a sphere around the user that nullifies all incarnation around them. And
that's just a cheat mechanic, come on.
And since they're all flying using incarnation, this forces them to basically start falling down, since there's no way for them to keep themselves in the air.
So it doesn't just affect Istar, but rather the entire nearby environment. It
creates a void nullifying space. Basically anything and anyone inside this sphere cannot use incarnation, and any active incarnation is cancelled.
Just incarnation, or does it go into things like perfect weapon controls and stuff, because someone has quite the weapon there that can generate a lot of flying ice?
Sacred arts aren't affected, and since Kirito lost his focus, the ice is thawing.
Okay.
But it specifically targets incarnation.
Okay.
Not sure if it really affects, but since Kirito used incarnation to trigger the sword's armament enhancing state, I think it also affected the sword as well because of that.
Oh, right, because at this point all of them just skipped the system call for activating the memory abilities, and now they can't do that because of the lack of incarnation. That's actually an interesting thing. I retract my statement about it being a cheat mechanic. That is something I like.
So Istar makes use of this by making sure that they fall down first and use aerial elements to cushion their fall. Then they just grab their lackeys and escape from the scene. Meanwhile, while the others are falling down and about to repeat the same mechanic to save themselves from being flat as pancakes, the serpent wakes up and catches them. It turns out that the serpent was the caretaker of the box that Star King Kirito had left for his younger self. And as a gratitude for saving her and her baby, she takes them to their crashed dragon and gives the box with the sacred art knowledge, the deep freeze sacred art to them before taking her leave. And at this point, Kirito just opens up a new door to the central cathedral, and they return to the cathedral, which leads us to the next illustration.
The reunion.
Yes, the box contained a scroll with knowledge on the art itself, and also had 3 bottles that could be used to instantly unfreeze anyone with them.
Oh, that's convenient. Just do not talk about the command lines to initiate the spell. That's...
Yes.
That reminds me of, what was that? Illustration running or turning when getting out of the great library room. Colonel was like, yeah, just read the thing, memorize it. No need to say it out loud for the reader to learn about the sacred arts. Just do your thing.
Yeah, similar in that it just skips the whole art, just save time.
Yep.
And to avoid having to create the actual process for undoing the freeze.
Yeah, the anime can do it with broken English in 10 years.
I'm pretty sure that's gonna skip the art too.
Oh, yeah, you can continue.
So the volume ends with the gang using the bottles to unfreeze Selka and Tiese and Ronye. Kirito unfreezes Ronye while Asuna unfreezes Tiese, and the volume ends with Tiese gazing dumbstruck at Eolyne.
With yet another cliffhanger, we come to the end of a book.
Yes, that's pretty much how the book ends.
I love the fact that
another
it is...
cliffhanger that's basically takes place at the same place and situation as we did in the previous
Exactly, I was just gonna say that. It is the exact same cliffhanger as last time. Yeah. Using the same cliffhanger twice, that is big brain move right there. But that is...
It's basically just Kawahara not knowing when to give up. And just writing too much plot, which ends up basically making the story too long to fit in a single volume.
Yeah, we'll probably have some climax battles in Unital Ring 39 or something.
Probably. I'm not even sure how long this whole story is going to take place at this point. Kawahara keeps saying that we're reaching the climax, and then, but I just keep finding new stuff to write about.
Right, he was talking about reaching the middle point and climaxes like 2 volumes ago, right?
I think something was about that, but at this point, I'm not even sure where the story is going just so far. I assume that at some point, Underworld and the Unital Ring will mix together, but when that's going to happen, that's still a mystery. In the afterword, Kawahara did say that he was planning to focus on Eolyne next volume, uncovering more knowledge about this character.
Yeah, we'll probably learn his middle name and we'll leave the rest for the next book at this point.
Not sure how much we're gonna learn, since there's Kirito and Asuna are supposed to be, and Alice are supposed to be logged out in just a few minutes at this point.
Oh my god, so we already know that's a lie. Perfect.
So I'm not sure if they're going to keep this whole mystery up for another day, for another login, or are they going to reactivate Fluxlight acceleration or something to keep them in Underworld? That's still in the air at this point.
We'll see. We have more time than Ricky has. But that means we can now move over to the Q&A, right?
Yeah.
Yay, Q&A. Let me go back to the questions then. Okay, our first question was, where can I watch this? Referring to our Wikia podcast. You are watching it right now. You're welcome for that answer. Go in with the next question. From Trajon, I don't know how to pronounce your name, sorry about that. But the question was, okay, if I remember correctly, during one of Ricky's live streams featuring the voice actor for Silica and Ronye, he mentioned that v26 would reveal whose Ronye's husband was. If possible, who was Ronye's husband? Was it possible? You tell me, Gsimenas.
In this volume, Ronye only gets a few lines at the very end. We only know that the Ronye and Tiese chose to freeze themselves just to keep Selka company, to not leave her alone, since at that point they were like 70-something years old, and apparently it seems that they've frozen their ages at mid to late 20s. But they've already had children, they've raised their children to adulthood, and they don't feel attachment as in responsibility for their children anymore since they're already out of the house. So they decide to stay with Selka and keep her company by freezing themselves along with her. And that's why those two were present with her, while the other Integrity Knights are frozen somewhere else.
And just to address the concern about the ethics about age freezing, because it was mentioned earlier that age freezing was abolished. The thing happening here is that the forceful use of the age freezing was abolished. You could still, as an integrity pilot, choose to freeze your age if you want to, from what we're understanding from this circumstance, right?
Explicitly mentioned, but we can assume that it's basically allowed if the person wants to.
Got it.
Because there's no other way to explain why they're in their 20s when they're 70 years old.
More often than not, we're trying to explain this stuff as much as Kawahara does, believe us. So that addresses the first question, right? Which means we can move on to the second one.
So the answer is basically that we don't know who's her husband at this point because she just didn't have enough time to delve into her family life.
Right. So next one is from Anna Julia. Are there any moments between Kirito and Asuna, and maybe more hints about the possibility that they had a kid in Underworld? Of course, referring to, what was that, volume 24, when someone mentioned if they could make AI children, and Asuna just became brain dead for a couple moments, and Kirito had a massive headache, referring to that moment, which was hinting about the fact that they probably had a children in Underworld. That was deleted from their memory.
To answer the first question, since we've exhausted our KiriAsu moment quota in the last few volumes, and mecha drags have limited passenger capacity, Kirito spends most of the volume having bro time with Eolyne, while Asuna is chillaxing with the ladies in the bath and kitchen. So there aren't really that many moments with Kirito and Asuna, if you disregard the fact that Kirito can now summon his wife from another planet at this point, just by imagining her. Now, for the other question, I don't remember any clear references about a possible child between them in this volume, but that won't stop the SAO Wikia Discord community from speculating that every single new character from now on has definitely got to be their child.
It's not just the Wikia community, everyone, like, a new character has an illustration, must be Kirito and Asuna's child.
I'm getting sick and tired of it. Especially that everyone's got to be their child. Like, jeez, how many? I know that they've spent 200 years together, but let's put a limit on how many kids they can have, okay?
Pets will have issues with that.
Otherwise.
But yeah, you remember that bit where people just speculated on Istar being their kid because his or her hair was looking like Asuna's with that hair separation thingy going on? That was one of the most ridiculous things I have gone through.
I think we've covered this question, unless there's something that you want to add.
I mean, I can always make more fun of these people, but let's move on. The next question is somewhat similar from Tiffany Jackson. Are there any more family moments between Yui, Kirito, and Asuna?
Yui spends the entirety of the volume off scene, since she's basically surveilling the network while Kirito, Asuna, and Az are diving into Underworld, so we don't actually see any of her action in this volume.
When you say she's surveilling the network, the Underworld backdoor connection, you mean?
I assume that she is looking for anyone trying to access Underworld during their dive, because as we know, the whole reason they're diving into Underworld is because someone managed to get access to it from somewhere else.
Right.
So she's probably looking for any trespassing while they're diving.
I guess that means we can move on to the next one. That is from Kiriboy. I tried to read the kana, but then realized it had a kanji at the end.
Which is basically just Kiribo.
Oh, okay. That explains a lot. Yeah, that makes sense. Who invented guns in Underworld while they still using swords? He has multiple questions, but we'll start with that. Now, if you didn't know, Underworld has plenty of mysteries at this point. And the most interesting one is Istar's gun. If you didn't check my screen share, I am using my own beautiful creation.
I'm seeing it, no worries. So to answer that question, in this case, Istar seems to have developed this specific gun himself, since it's tailored to him, or her, I'm not sure yet. But most of the technological innovations in the Underworld stem from the Star King, though Airy and the others have greatly contributed to certain projects of his. So other guns may have been developed with knowledge from the Star King, but as far as I know, this specific one was created either by Istar or by people under him or her, since this specific gun is tailored for them.
So as far as we know, at the moment, guns are not a mainstream form of weaponry.
Well, their mechadrags are armed with cannons, so it's not exactly non-mainstream. They still use swords, but guns and weapons are a thing in this world. That's why I'm saying that the Star King is responsible for most of the innovations, so the guns probably originate from his research, but this specific gun is modeled for Istar specifically.
Got it. His next question is, will there be Argo scenes? Of course, that's not a will question, it's a was question at this point, but...
So, Argo does take part in the action, she's taking part in the Hornet battle, but she's not giving too much spotlight in this volume. Her main action was in volumes 23 to 24. She's around, she gets a few dialogue lines and jabs at the other characters, but no major scenes that stand out, actually.
Is it more lines than Arya or not? That's where we draw the line.
I think Arya had more lines from Argo.
Oh wow, what a disappointment of a volume this is. The next question, again from Kiriboy, and why is Airy's pet a bath-loving rat? It's
not actually Airy's pet, it's Ronye's pet from Moon Cradle. Basically, that's a rat's been living around for 200 years, and Airy's looking after it since Ronye decided to freeze herself.
Do we know the gender of the rat? Because we have a trend with females loving bats in this series.
I know that it's named Nuts, but I don't remember if its gender is stated anywhere. And we know that it likes bats because its species name is called a Socrack. It basically lives in swamps, so yes, it likes water.
Also, there's a logical explanation for someone liking bats this time around. That's good. That's progress. Do I move on to the next one?
I think so.
Right, next one is from Tyler Price. He says, I know that Silica and Lisbeth has been receiving a good amount of screen time, but what about others like Klein and Agil? That's a very good question, Tyler. I would very much love to have an answer for that as well. Also, another question, is Argo continuously prominent in volumes 23 to 26? But I believe we already answered that.
Yes, we did.
So let's focus on the most important thing. Let's focus on Klein.
Of the 4 characters mentioned in the first question, only Silica actually has a lot of time and the spotlight in this volume. The other 3 do take part in the battle itself. They're mostly limited to just being in the background or a few dialogues and jokes.
One day we're gonna have that Klein point of view.
And I think that Klein actually got more dialogue lines than the other 2. As in, there was a joke about him, Great Klein, being able to sense any enemies around, excluding ghosts. And Sinon jabbing back that, who's to say that there aren't any ghosts around here.
So, do we move on to the next question then?
Yeah, as I said, they are present, they do take part in the action, and they have some dialogue lines. There's also another line where Sinon gets nicknamed Shino by Frisco, and all the other guys start calling her that, including Klein. Even though Shino specifically warned that if they continue calling her that, she'll definitely wham them.
Alright then, next question is from Jesse Norton. Can Mito get an anime original moment in the Unital Ring adaptation? I think he means, can Mito get... My speech is going down. Can Mito get introduced into Unital Ring? And what do you think about Professor Shigemura? Will he get his role in the events of Unital Ring? That's kind of a separate question, so let's focus on Mito for now, because I believe Reiki has said something about that quite recently.
Well, in a recent interview, Kawahara stated that he's not sure if Mito will make the cut into the progressive novel at this point, because she would have to be shoehorned at this point in the story, and he's not yet certain if she will make it into the story, and even if she does, it's likely not going to be the same Mito from the movie, because you'll have to work her into the story. So I don't really see much from the novel's perspective. I don't think Mito will come into play into the Unital Ring series, but with the anime, if the War of Underworld anime is anything to go by, there's nothing else. Shoehorning won't fix anything.
But we know she'll probably get shoehorned anyways when Reiki is forced to write a
Blu-ray
special.
As I said, there's nothing a little shoehorning won't fix. Air quotes.
Yes. And also, I want to stay on that question. We still have absolutely nothing in Unital Ring regarding Eiji and YUNA, right? We have been waiting for it for quite a while, but nothing is coming.
Nope, not at this point. I was expecting them to become somewhat relevant because of Unital being the supposed enemy in ordinal scale, so it somewhat seems really relevant, but at this point they're not.
That's the one time you can actually shoehorn a character. It's the perfect opportunity. Yep,
but so far ordinal scale hasn't been relevant, except for the fact that they've got Ogmas now, and Eiji and YUNA maybe got mentioned once or twice, but nothing more than that. As for the question about Shigemura, at the moment I don't see where he could be relevant unless he's the one helping out some unknown antagonist enter Underworld and sue chaos there.
That is actually a good mention, because was Shigemura even mentioned? I think he was mentioned by name in the Alicization novels, of course, but was he actually mentioned as being part of the Project Alicization development, or was he just mentioned as a passing name or something? As a prior research?
In the novel, he was only mentioned as being the professor that in the lab that Higa and Rinko and Kayaba attended, and that was about
too.
it.
Don't forget about Sugo.
Yes, but he's not relevant in Project Alicization, so as I was saying, the novel only mentioned him in passing as being that guy that was in charge of the lab. The movie seems to show him being introduced to the Project Alicization stuff, but he's never present in the anime since then, so we don't really know what's been happening with him.
But the anime did mention he helped with the development, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I watched that mess, but I do faintly remember him being mentioned as part of the development. Yes, he wasn't on screen.
We don't really know what happened to him since
he's
not present in the anime, and there's no reference to what happened to him.
I mean, he was present in the openings for like 2 cuts. That's something. That's more than Argo gets more often than not. Oh, Argo is just a running joke now.
Anime openings also have featured Yuna long before she even got briefly cameoed at the end, and then got an episode to her.
To be honest, the anime openings have been more faithful to the series than the actual series, so I'll leave that there. Though, to be frank, we have a lot of time to have any kind of OS involvement in Unital Ring, I guess. We have 15, 20, 50 more novels at this pace.
I'm pretty sure that's gonna be a lot, since I'm not sure when we're gonna reach the halfway point at this point. And is there a halfway point at this point?
The halfway point does not exist, no. We just keep going. Next question. Kind of a vague one, but we'll cover that still. It's from Anime Gamer 2000, Anime X Gamer, let's not forget the X. Is Eolyne's true identity the AI version of Underworld Kirito in the aftermath of Alicization? He's of course referring to the copy of Star King before Kirito's memories were suppressed and is kept somewhere by Higa, who he still has access to the internet and is speaking with Kayaba, but go ahead, I'll leave the floor to you.
I'm not sure where this headcanon came about, but Eolyne's introduced as a character that's been living in Underworld for quite a few years now, and since the Fluxlight exploration has been stopped for a long time now, I don't see how Eolyne could turn out to be Kirito in disguise.
Good. Now that we have that covered, we have one final question, I believe, which I need to click somewhere else because it's not on Twitter. It is from Hisui, from the SAO Wikia team. Do you have... I forgot to change the screenshots, by the way. There we go. That is nicely timed, remembering what I was supposed to do, the one task I have. Hisui asks, do you have any theory regarding Eolyne and Istar? Because they know each other from the past and they're all vague and stuff.
Well, we do know that they're childhood friends, that's a fact. It's been alluded to in the previous novels, and we can see that those two have a history based on what they're saying to each other. As Eolyne's aware of who Istar is, even his full name, and they've had duels in the past, including the unification tournament. We don't know the intimacies, nuances between their relationship, but we know that they've been acquaintances for a long time now. That's where our facts kind of end. There have been theories that, among others, that they could both be Kirito and Asuna's child, or there's been talk from the Axel World readers that Istar could be related to some Axel World characters, but since I haven't read Axel World past Volume 2, I think, I'm not really aware of Axel World's plot that much and their characters to make any assumptions on that front.
It's just such a depressing fact that we're gonna take 15 more volumes for this thing to end, and then we're gonna have to read like 30 volumes of Axel World. That is really gonna be painful whenever that ends up happening. Is that all the questions we have? I think I mixed up the order a bit because I was supposed to go into the Eolyne question after this one. I have a screenshot ready for it, but doesn't matter. I think we covered all of them. I didn't skip any.
Yeah, I think we covered everything, at least everything that I have marked as being asked for this session. So, as I said for the last question, all I can say is that what I know from the novel right now, I don't really want to speculate on matters that I haven't read yet.
Do we have a reason for why he doesn't take off the mask? Just came to me. I'm pretty sure we do. Is he like sensitive to the sun? Like, who was that? Viscount Eophilus back on floor 4 or 3? 4 or 5 maybe?
I did say that he's apparently sensitive to the sun for some reason, and Istar has said that Eolyne has been weak of health since his early days, but even during the night he still doesn't take off that mask, and even Kirito started to find it suspicious. The mask stays on throughout the entire day, no matter whether the sun is actually present or not.
I mean, just saying, but Kirito was suspicious of Viscount Eophilus as well, and he was correct. Just getting it out there.
As far as we know, Eolyne's ID is different, so at least he's supposed to be a different person, but how his past ties into Yu-Gi-Oh and why he looks like him, that's a different question.
The moment that's explained, the Yu-Gi-Oh effect will just wear off, so I'm pretty sure that's why that's been getting delayed for 3 fucking volumes at this point.
Well, the next volume is supposed to be about Eolyne, but as I said before,
we'll log out in 3 minutes.
How's going to go through Eolyne's backstory in like 10 or so minutes that's left.
I kind of feel more sad about Tiese and Ronye, you know, they froze themselves just so they can wake up and see Kirito again, and just Kirito is like, hey guys, I'm a lockout now. That just reminds me of Pooh's arrival in Alicization. He's like, he spends all those 2 years getting hyped about the next time he gets to kill people, and the moment he gets the chance, boom, that kid that destroyed his plans last time around comes in, plunges him into oblivion, and he dies again. Perfect. That's one of the best moments in the entire SAO series. But now I am going completely off topic, so I feel like this is a good chance to end things. How about you?
I think we've covered everything.
So we'll see you guys next time, whichever book that's going to be. Progressive Volume 8-1, please.
I'm gonna read it in the coming week or so maybe in a 2 or so weeks, depends on my schedule.
Okay, you heard it from him. Stop bugging me, please. Thank you. It's all on you now. Good luck.
Thanks.
That brings us to the end of this podcast. From what I can see, the recording has been slightly longer than I hoped, but I'll have to take care of that. So that's gonna be fun. And yeah, that's been it. That's been Sword Online Volume 26 Unital Ring 5. I was gonna say hopefully the numbers match again sometime in the future, but then I realized that's not gonna happen without 9 volumes of side story content. So disregard that wish. That is where we're ending because my brain is obviously not in functioning mode anymore. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay cool.
Keep your cool.